Hey everyone, welcome to episode 7 of the Product Ball podcast. I'm your host, Harini Kannan, and today's episode is a must listen for AI engineers, AI product managers, and anyone passionate about building AI agents and copilots. Our guest is Rajaswa Patil, an exceptional AI engineer and a sharp first principles product thinker. He has been a driving force behind multiple groundbreaking projects, including Microsoft's GitHub Copilot chat and Postman's AI assistant called Postbot. Get ready for a 2-hour deep dive into the technical and product sides of AI engineering. This episode is packed with insights you will want to revisit time and time again. So let's dive in. Rajaswa Patil, welcome to the Product Bowl podcast. We are super happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Harini. So
Um,
glad to be here today. Quite excited about this.
I am super excited. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I think this is, I think the highlight of this episode is going to be, you have tons of literature on generative AI applications and, the pros and cons and everything in the internet, but most of them are pretty surface level. So I've been trying to get guests who are, in the weeds, who are working on building these products, used by customers, the challenges and everything that they face. So your profile is amazing. You have two projects mentioned in your website, which I will link to in the show notes, which has two products which are loved by software developers in general. One is, for Postman, which is the Postbot AI assistant, and one is the GitHub Copilot. So you have obviously, worked with the weeds in the productionized generative AI applications. So super excited. So if you want to give a quick introduction on, your profile, what you do, and your background and what you're working on to the audience.
Uh, yeah, I can do that. I've been primarily working on AI for code, and this goes back to the time we didn't have any LLMs. Uh, I've worked on models as small as Distilbert and BERT and so on for code-specific tasks. And back then, it was just classification, summarization, and so on. Beyond that, I've worked on text to SQL kind of tasks or text to Prolog, text to data log, essentially natural language interfaces for database querying. And after the whole LLM boom that we had after GPT-3, I was at Microsoft back then. Briefly worked on the Copilot chat product within Visual Studio, which is the IDE. And from there, I moved on to Postman, where I've been working on Postbot, which is like an agentic in-app AI assistant for API workflows within Postman. More recently, I've taken a break from Postman and I'm exploring independent consulting, where I'm again working on slightly moving away from AI for code. So I'm mostly looking into the whole service and the software paradigm, trying to automate tasks using agentic AI, code interpreting, and so on. And that is pretty exciting too these days.
Absolutely. I think you're literally in the bleeding edge of, first it was vanilla LLMs and RAG applications. Now it's agentic workflows, and you're
Yes.
literally working the, bleeding edge of everything. So yeah, super excited. Um, so the first question, can you compare and contrast the underlying technical architectures of the AI assistants that you have worked on? Especially in the context of LLMs, are they purely LLM based? Are you taking simply the foundation model and building, on top of it, or do you incorporate other techniques like, RAG or NER, named entity recognition, or whatever, anything? So how do you go about it? Yeah.
Um, yes. So I think the two products we're talking about is obviously Copilot and Postbot. My stint with the Copilot team was relatively shorter. I think it was roughly a year. And this was a bit early as well. I mean, it was not super early, but in LLM timelines, it was a bit early. We were around, I think, GPT-3 back then. Uh, the thing about coding assistants is that it is one vertical within generative AI, which is completely explored. Obviously, it has found a lot of success as well. And now there is a playbook of sorts, which is already out there, right? So there's not much innovation or anything like that. You just need to follow a few leading products, and you'll know what UX, what architectures, and all these things you need to put in place, right? Uh, Essentially, when it comes to products like Postbot or Copilot, or even something like Cursor, right? These are in ID or in editor or in-app assistants. And if you look at it, they have evolved over the time in terms of abstractions. So the first thing you had was inline autocomplete, which
Right.
is you can I just complete the code within my editor without switching context, opening up a browser or something else. As chat models came out, we had Copilot chat. Similarly, for Postbot, also we have a chat kind of an interface. And now the next evolution is obviously agentic, where you have Copilot Workspace or you have Cursor Composer, or even within Postman, you have this API collection builder, which is like doing multiple tasks at once, right? Editing multiple files, looking at multiple APIs, and so on. So that is the abstraction. The important bit is all of these abstractions have been served at scale, which is really important. And you are operating in a formal domain, essentially. Code is a formal domain. So accuracy is measured in terms of formal aspects. When it comes to scale and when it comes to expected accuracies, I think you cannot always just throw things at a LLM and expect things to work. There is fair bit of workflow engineering involved. So that is one thing, right? You cannot, uh, for example, if Postbot is an agentic architecture, you cannot just say, I'm going to give it a number of tools and just let it call any number of tools in any order and so on. That is not how it works. You have to actually maintain a few states. And this is now, I think, available in frameworks like LangGraph. You can define a
Right.
graph, which is like a state machine of sorts. And that is one thing. Other thing is you cannot always use the biggest LLMs because you might be using smaller fine-tuned models for specific pieces or plumbing in your workflow. To give you an
Right.
example, Copilot has a logistic regression model, which is a 7-parameter model. It is
Ah.
actually shipped in the extension. So if you go to the VS Code extension, you reverse engineer it. In the source code somewhere, you will find 7 floating point numbers.
Wow.
And that model is just trained. It's just 7 features, which is, I think, number of keystrokes is one feature, the time passed since last suggestion was accepted, the language, the programming language. These are 7 features. And based
Right.
on that, it identifies, do I trigger an autocomplete query here or not? Because
Ah.
uh, autocomplete is automatically trigger as soon as we pause typing, and there's a
Right.
300 milliseconds debounce. If
Right.
every user in VS Code is hitting that query after every pause, your servers are going to get overwhelmed, and you need a model. But
Right.
again,
Right.
you cannot query the model as well, the classification model. So it has to go on edge, and it's
Right.
as simple as a 7 parameter logistic regression model. Same
Right.
thing for Postbot as well. There are small classifiers sprinkled around in the system somewhere to route things and so on.
Right.
So it's always a mix of both. It's never throw everything
Right.
to the latest, biggest LLM. That's for sure. Yeah.
Right. No, I think that's an excellent point you're making, and it's surprising the size of the model that you just mentioned. It's just a simple logistic regression model with like 7 parameters.
Yeah.
I think the other one that you mentioned is it's the context we're using. If it's like a code generation and everything, where your accuracy is going to be you gotta have like a higher metric, whereas if it's like a
Yes.
customer support or something, maybe you can have a higher leeway. Um,
Yes. So even in that senses, right? So when it comes to code generation, uh, I think throughput is very important, especially if it
right,
is something like autocomplete specifically.
right,
And that automatically puts your options are very limited. You cannot go beyond 8 billion parameter models and beyond 16-bit precision, right? Because
right,
your throughput equations just go off the charts after that.
right.
And even that is not enough. So if you look at blogs by Cursor or Aider, or even
Hmm.
maybe Copilot has a few blogs,
Right,
definitely there are smaller models which are maybe sometimes fine-tuned as well. But also there are
hmm,
early stopping criterias. Now this is becoming mainstream. You have structured output generation and you have constraint decoding and all these
right,
things.
Right.
but that wasn't always very democratized. So internally, you have
Mhm.
parsers for example, I just declare a for loop or a
Right.
function signature, and I just do parenthesis open, parenthesis close, and I'm
Hmm.
expecting the assistant to populate the function body.
Right.
uh, I need to understand where the scope is ending so that I can at least stop my completion. So you have to
Right.
incrementally keep on parsing your generation, know where the stopping criterias are, and so on. With respect to the
Right.
code structure, the code tree,
Right.
I think that is also super important from performance as well as UX perspective.
Right. No, I think amazing points. I think people who are just getting started or the teams who are just getting started would probably not know the minute details that you mentioned, right? So awesome. Yeah. So many takeaways from just the first question. I'm super excited. I think this perfectly tails in the next question. We talked about fine tuning smaller models. So the second question is, does domain specific fine tuning, especially in your use cases, for API workflows and Postbot or code generation, like you mentioned in Copilot, does that impact the performance and efficiency of the LLMs in production environments, like what you have seen so far?
So I think for tasks like code generation, domain-specific fine-tuning in itself, whether it's at a code level, at a source code level, or at an API level, I don't think it adds a lot of alpha as such if you're talking about a
Mhm.
general purpose model,
Right.
because most of these models have already seen a lot of code and most of the APIs are public and so on. The documentation is available on the web. Mostly people do fine-tuning these days for performance reasons, even in the code domain. For example, uh, the completion model, right? So you cannot go beyond 8 billion parameters, so you have to fine-tune that.
Right.
Or sometimes you want to enforce a specific format. This especially is important when you're doing tasks like code edits, right? Because now you
Hmm.
have to output a diff format or something that can convert to a patch that you can then show in the UX as a diff
Right.
view. If you want to enforce those formatting structures, I think fine-tuning makes sense there as well. For example, Cursor has fine-tuned a
Hmm.
70 billion llama model for their fast apply command K thing. Uh,
Okay.
so in cases like this, it might make sense. Beyond that, I think fine-tuning in this particular vertical does not make a lot of sense.
Hmm.
It does help in tasks like database querying. For example, if I have a
Right.
database which has a huge schema,
Hmm.
and maybe my prompt is getting overwhelmed by the schema information,
Hmm.
or until very recently, you couldn't just fit it properly in the prompt context itself.
Right.
In places like that, I think fine-tuning helps. And I've
Okay.
actually done this at TCS research as well, where we
Mhm.
were actually training adapters, small adapters for different database schemas. And we
Okay.
were like kind of lazy loading them on the go.
Okay. Okay.
So for things like that, maybe yes. But beyond that, I don't think domain-specific fine-tuning is helping a lot.
Interesting. Interesting. This was the same kind of feedback I got from our previous guest. She's also an AI engineer, Apurva Misra, and she also mentioned that she finds RAG to be much more practical than fine tuning, no matter how small the model is or what kind of use case that is. Um, was interesting that like now I've spoken to two engineers who are actually building it, and pretty similar feedback. So that's very interesting.
I think there's
Yeah.
one more very important piece when it comes to fine-tuning, right? Which is
Mhm.
uh, data sensitization. Because let's talk about APIs, right? If I want to
Right.
do, let's say, API test generation fine-tuning for Postman, and
Mhm.
people test all sorts of things in their API test. It might be the headers, it might be the API keys, or PII data in your responses. Now, if
Right.
you're fine-tuning a single model on the broader data, there's always
Right.
chance of data leakage. And we see this happening. You see API keys being auto-completed in GitHub Copilot and so on.
Right.
So
Which you
data
don't want.
leakage, yes, it's a bit tricky when it comes to code and secrets and so on. So that's
Right.
another like it's a big no from the security team whenever you
Right.
take that up. So
Right.
yeah, that's always there.
I think um, 2 points from the conversation here. One, you mentioned domain specific, like you mentioned the project that with TCS, because I have been working in the cybersecurity use cases and everything. What I've been thinking about is especially for security use cases, this could, I think, transition to, fintech as well. I think like finance. You see Bloomberg models all,
Right.
fine-tuned on financial data. Um, my hypothesis, I've not tried this yet, is my hypothesis is when comparing to taking a fairly decent model like llama, yeah, 8 billion parameter or whatever, and then building a RAG pipeline with it, versus say take a very small model like even like BERT or something, and then fine tune on say um, my security data sets. It could be security logs, it could be simply the data that you see in your command line. My hypothesis was a fine-tuned model, which is much smaller, would be easier to deploy in like it would be faster and everything. But I do not consider scenarios of securing the security model.
Right.
Uh,
Yes.
um, Interesting. Okay. Do you have any thoughts specifically on which domain it could be much more useful? Because so far what I'm hearing is mostly fine tuning may not be like the best use case, but do you have you seen or do you think of any specific domain where it could be much more useful? Say, take a very small model. It doesn't have to be even like the biggest, like, or the latest
Yeah.
language model.
As I said, right, I think fine-tuning mostly people are using for only three things. One is inducing knowledge, which is previously unseen, and it is too vast in order to capture the broader essence of the domain. It is too vast to fit in one prompt. I think that is one use case, which is very obvious. And then the
Right,
other two, which are a bit practical, are obviously performance, like distill a
right,
larger model into a smaller one and deploy that. And the
right,
third one is enforcing certain output structures. Uh,
right.
I think these are the only three use cases. Beyond that, so we did fine-tune a few models. For example, we invented or kind of designed this language called SQL, which was Flow's query language, which was
Okay,
for data manipulation in API workflows.
right.
And it was a fork of SQL of sorts, but
Okay,
every LLM used to hallucinate with SQL operators, and that was a big issue. So we did
right.
fine-tune 3.5 Turbo and so on.
Okay,
And maybe it helps if you have a brand new programming language. Yes, maybe it will help.
okay.
But how many languages do you really have coming up every day,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So uh, I'm really not sure where and other bit of this, right? This is not a static bit. You have to think about this if you're leading an AI team or you're
Hmm.
leading AI investments. You have to think about this from a time scale. It's a temporal thing you have to keep in mind. You're fine-tuning something
Right,
today.
right,
Uh, and what if tomorrow, let's say we have O3 now, you give it
right,
enough context, it will just do some scratch pad thinking, and maybe
right,
it wasn't required at all. So you have to think about that as well. It's going to take a couple of weeks for data curation, couple of weeks for training, couple of weeks for
right,
like a bit like whatever rate teaming and all those things, and then deployment
right,
until then you have a new model come out. So I think that has definitely changed the sentiment around fine tuning quite a bit.
right.
Um, so I think that's also a very
Absolutely.
important
You
bit.
you put all
Yeah.
these efforts for 2 weeks or I don't know, 2 months, and then suddenly Sam Altman comes and says 12 days of,
Yes.
12, 12 releases, here we go. You can do everything in like in a single.
Exactly. So,
Um,
uh, yeah.
no, absolutely. I think that's a great answer, and I think that's a great point to for any of the AI team to keep in mind. I think. Awesome. Yeah. So moving on to the next question, what are the biggest challenges in collecting, preparing, and curating high quality training data for LLMs, which are intended for production use cases? How do you handle issues if you have seen any, for bias and data drift and all that?
Yes. So I think code generation tasks, usually there's not much data drift that we see.
Right,
Uh, Most of these, like majority of your traffic is coming from languages and frameworks which have existed for a while. And
right,
even if it's something new, it usually is combination of a bunch of abstractions that have always existed. So
right,
it's fine. The only drift you can get is maybe via UX. Maybe you
right,
interact a bit differently with chat, but a bit differently with agentic and so on. But I think that's fine.
Right.
Collection, I think in general, going beyond code as well, right?
Hmm.
Anytime I join any team, my first conversation with the product manager or the person in charge is, oh, where are our subject matter experts, right? Uh,
Right.
or where are our QAs? Because I don't think your most valuable asset is your developer or your AI engineer. It's your subject matter expert. If I'm doing,
Ooh.
let's say, AI for API testing, if I don't know, if my team doesn't know what good API tests are, I cannot engineer the right workflows. I cannot write the correct prompts. I cannot write the correct evals, and the whole
Right.
flywheel around data and eval goes off, right?
Right.
So I think subject matter experts are the key piece to this. And
Right.
I think increasingly we should think about this as uh, this whole generative AI paradigm in an
Hmm.
eval-driven or a data-driven like AI development lifecycle has
Right.
turned into like an investment option where you're investing expertise and productivity of the subject matter expert for the first few weeks. Maybe they're
Right.
curating your base evals, they're evaluating your initial product, and so on. And then it will compound because now the AI pipeline, the prompt chain or the model, whatever it is, has learned the patterns which the
Right.
subject matter expert has curated. And now
Right.
it's going to save them in productivity hours and so on. So
Right.
if you think about it that way, I think your entire pipeline becomes very easy if you build everything around your subject matter experts,
Right.
collecting, preparing, curating, whatever it is, right? I think uh, that is really important. If you don't have that, then it's trouble
Right.
because then you
Right.
have to go and learn how to write good API test. You have to go and learn how to migrate code bases if you're writing an AI tool for that.
Right.
So then it's a very long task, and time is something you really can't spend
Right.
carelessly in today's AI world. So yes,
Tell me
I
about
think
it. Personally, I've seen this when working in cybersecurity, coming from a completely non-security background. Like I wouldn't know, what's good from bad. That person or the security engineer or the security researcher is going to be the biggest asset.
yes.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect answer. I think one follow-up question for that is the eval data set. Do you have any tips or ideas on building, say, like a golden data set for evaluating your Gen AI product? Like, the challenge that I have particularly faced is, I don't have a lot of data. So, and either I have to create a synthetic data set and I use LLM as a judge to, decide, or use LLM itself to, create my data set. So yeah, your thoughts, or what's the best way?
I think uh, so there's really two stages to this, right? One is when you're bootstrapping your product, which is like a V0 is going out.
Mm.
And one is when your product has been out there for a while and you know it is going to need some improvements. For the bootstrap stage, obviously you'll have to, I'll say just start with the uh, bare minimum and get your early access partners in place
Right,
who would be okay with not getting the best out of the product just yet.
right,
And make sure before you're rolling it out, your data flywheel is complete. What that means is there has to be UX mechanism for your early users to report certain things. Can be as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down. If you don't
right,
have time for that, just do Easter egg magic commands. Just do
right,
/ report or something like that, and you can
right,
just filter
right,
it out using a string match.
right,
And uh, and then you have to again fetch all the context and related data that was used to construct the prompts and so on from your production DBs. So make sure your security clearances are in place and all those things so that you can get
right,
data from prod DBs fairly quickly. So your
right,
data flywheel from a user feedback perspective should be uh, in place way, way early. However raw or like ugly it is, it's fine. Uh,
right,
because even for internal testing or early user testing, it's going to help a lot to find out issues and
right,
just put it back in your eval bucket. I think that is
right,
one thing. I think your eval dataset should always reflect your actual usage patterns, like what
right,
kind of queries or interactions are your users doing today.
right,
If you have that flywheel in place, I think a lot of that can be automated, and just one person checking 20 samples a day every
right,
morning is going to help you a lot. Evals can be very specific as well. I mean, it can be very simple. You can just do string contains, not contains, or regex match. You don't have to be, and if nothing works, just do LLM as a judge. I think that's fine. Uh,
right,
you don't look at the absolute values. You never look at that. That's a mistake.
right,
You look at the regressions.
right,
Are we moving up or not? I think
right,
that is the only way to move forward. If you do these
right.
two things, I think any team should be fine.
Excellent. No, a double thumbs up for the design pattern that you just mentioned, like, feedback loop, which, thumbs up or thumbs down or whatever way you craft the design. Excellent. I think lots of very specific takeaways there for the audience. So this is awesome. Um, I think the next question, a lot of the folks are thinking about this. A lot of the folks are, trying to define this. So the question is, RAG versus agentic RAG. What's the difference? What do you, how do you, draft that or define that difference? Your experience in building RAG pipelines and, where they're best suited for.
Yes, I don't think I've had very hands-on experience with RAG features myself, although I've been involved. Uh, Agentic RAG obviously is, I think it's a fairly fresh term,
Right,
but I do understand what the difference is. I think RAG in general, it's essentially a search plus generation operation.
right,
Now your search can be, and even you can go a bit broader and say it's just context gathering and generation operation. Now your context gathering can be a search operation, or it can be a very structured context gathering as well. For example, if I'm doing API test generation, I know
right,
what all do I need. I need the response from the API so that I can check for particular values or schemas and so on. I need the
right,
API body. I need the params. I need the documentation, things like that. So
right.
there can be a very hard-coded retrieval part to it, and I would classify that as well as RAG. But I think the more general definition is that you smartly generate a query and
Right.
or embedding or something like that, and then retrieve based on that. I think the use cases I've seen have been mostly around just search. For example, at Postman, we did drag over our Learning Center documentation, and you can ask
Okay.
anything about Postman or seek any help. And that is like a very basic RAG use case. But we also have something like I want to create API workflow. So, for example, you can say, can you create an API workflow for me, which will fetch the latest stock prices and send it to my WhatsApp. And now it will
Right.
go on the Postman API network, search for a stock price API, search for a WhatsApp API, combine them together in some manner, and give you an end-to-end API workflow. So that
Right.
is also RAG, which is a bit a fancy use case.
Right.
Agentic
I
RAG,
like
I
that
think,
use case very much.
yes, I mean, but then the key is it really usable? Getting it in a usable
Right.
state is very difficult because you need to get your search right, you need to get your the plumbing right, and it has to be
Right.
executable. And there's many things there. You have to set up the right authorization,
Right.
the right parameters, and there's actually many steps beyond that before a user can
Right.
actually use it. So it's a bit tricky if you look
Right.
at it from a product perspective.
Right.
Agentic RAG, I think. It's just one step beyond RAG. I think it's like multi-step, and you can smartly decide what data source I want to query and so on, which I think is
Right.
extremely powerful because
Right.
sometimes you might want web search, sometimes you might want local search, and there are use cases where your data store might be lacking uh, the information that is required to satisfy user intent. In
Right.
that case, your RAG module should be able to ideally independently query for more information. So I think
Right.
it is super powerful. But again, I'm yet to see how usable it is, how people are evaluating it, and so on. I think that is yet to be seen.
Right. Right. I I'm very bullish on agentic RAG, but as you said, as you just mentioned, I've not seen like a real practical use case, except in startups where they're building workflow automation, right? Like through Product Bulb or for Product Bulb, I was doing research on companies like Gumloop. It was a YC backed startup. It is a YC backed startup, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I had a couple of other actually students from India who have come here to UCLA. They are building something. They are planning to apply for YC and looking at uh, Product Bulb's blog on Gumloop. They wanted to know how do you like it, so they're looking to build on. So it's interesting. I've not seen I don't know how the interior works and everything, but probably that's one use case where you clearly have because it's a workflow automation. You have separate entities within that agentic workflow. So technically, you should be able
Yes.
to. Yeah.
I think it also, I mean, the backend is, I mean, the implementation is fairly trivial. You just have
Right.
a conversational tool calling agent with different data sources that it can query. Uh,
Right.
at least from a theoretical perspective, it is trivial. I think
Right.
converting it to a product is very tricky because when it comes to
Right.
RAG, essentially what you're saying is you don't have to go and visit 100 different contexts. I'll bring
Right.
all the relevant information in one place, and it
Right.
is super powerful. But
Right.
then the generation is easy. Gaining user confidence is a bit tricky because
Right.
to verify the outputs, the user
Right.
has to actually go and manually look up the sources and so on. Now,
Correct.
many RAG systems have started adding citations to, for example, in Perplexity, you
Right.
have the citations like one, two, three, and
Right.
so on, or
Right.
you have like embeddings and so on of videos and documents. I think UX and further beyond your conversational interaction, further UX, it might also include AI, is super
Right.
important because
Right.
more automation means less supervision or less involvement of the user. And
Right.
then verification step becomes a bit tricky. Gaining that
Right.
confidence becomes tricky. So
Right.
that's all is there.
No, no, you're absolutely right. I think that's where products are going to be differentiated. When you mentioned Perplexity, the other one that came to mind was Google's Notebook LM. Um,
Oh,
uh, finally, they have woken up. I hope. I hope. But no, no. Awesome. I think uh, great takeaways there. I think for anyone looking at building their own RAG pipelines. I think the next section of questions are craft on LLM deployment in infrastructure. Um, so what are the key considerations for deploying LLMs in different production environments? You think about, edge devices or in cloud nodes or, on-premise bare metal machines. So have you seen, is there any specific infrastructure choices that are crucial, or containerization? Yeah.
I think I'm not much of an infra guy, so I usually just advise take the best available API out there.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what provider it. Obviously, if you're deploying at Postman or GitHub scale, it's a different story
Right.
because you have enterprise customers and so on. But usually, I just advise just use off-the-shelf APIs and just
Okay.
focus on iteration and product improvement over uh, these things. But I think there are some use cases where you can't just escape this, right? For example,
Right.
autocomplete. There is no way you have to generate a token every 10 milliseconds.
Right.
You have to get a 120, 130 token response in like under a
Right.
second, and it's
Right.
any delay and it's too slow, and the user is going to churn out.
Right.
Over there, I think model size is definitely one thing. Other
Right.
is people do quantize models. People do run things on low precision and so on. As a part of my job at Postman, I ran this POC with the AWS Generative AI Innovation team, where we
Okay.
were trying to just benchmark on performance for our autocomplete feature.
Okay.
And we tried a bunch of models,
Right.
and this was code autocomplete. So we had everything from, let's say, Opus, Cloud Opus, which is
Right.
like very huge, to a
Right.
1 billion phi or your
Right.
what's that? DeepSeek and the co-encoder models, right? These were the small
Right.
models
Right.
from
Right.
the
Right.
Chinese
Okay.
labs.
Okay. Okay.
So, and then we tried different infrastructure, like in underlying inference engines. We tried VLLM, we tried
Right.
TensorRT-LM, and
Mhm.
different instances and so on. Uh,
Right.
Initially, it feels like it's very simple. There are a few levers that you control, which is, and these are all hardware or infra layers, which is like
Right.
what precision I'm running on and what is the GPU I'm using, or what is the
Right.
inference engine I'm using.
Right.
But you go deeper into it and you see there are more nuances to it. For example, uh, coencoder, for example, it's a 2 billion
Right.
parameter model. So you
Right.
feel it will be faster, but
Right.
turns out coencoder has a very generous tokenizer. So the same prompt which Llama is encoding in 100 tokens, coencoder will take
Uh,
200 tokens for it. And
I
now
see.
your per token equations just go off because
Right.
it's a quadratic relation.
Right.
So
Right.
you have to think about the tokenizer as well. And tokenizer usually is never a part of the performance equation. You
Right.
never think
Right.
about it. But number of tokens is something that is going to affect it a lot. So I think these are key considerations which uh, usually people miss.
Okay.
Uh,
Right.
Beyond, so this is just the performance bit. I think obviously
Right.
when you are serving at scale, you have to think about reliability, uptime, and for enterprise deployments, you have to think about data
Right.
security as well.
Right.
So even there, I would say the easiest choice is just to go for an enterprise offering, maybe from
Right.
Azure or Bedrock, if you have that luxury.
Right.
Uh, if not, just just use some shared inference for hosted APIs, like maybe
Right.
just vanilla OpenAI or vanilla Azure OpenAI or something like that,
Right. Right.
and do your best to redact information before you're sending over to these APIs. Uh,
Right.
I think that's all I can tell as of now. Beyond that, I haven't really gone too deep into the infra bit.
This is already actually way deeper than I think a lot of folks would know, I'm sure. I'm curious to know your experience with Bedrock. The general notion that I've got is it's really good, but it has a high threshold of learning. Like you know, with documentation or whatever, it's a little bit more complicated than
Yes.
probably getting started with, I don't know, Vertex AI or something.
Yes, I think that is actually very true because as part
Okay.
of the, I mean, we weren't specifically focusing on Bedrock. It could have been
Okay.
anything.
Right.
It could have been SageMaker or even our own EC2 being fired up. Uh,
Right.
so one abolition that I added or requested
Right.
to the AWS team was, oh, we have Llama 8 billion on Bedrock and
Right.
we have Llama 8 billion in open source weights. Can we just do a
Right.
SageMaker deployment on this particular instance?
Mm-hmm.
And then compare Bedrock versus our own independent deployment numbers in
Right.
terms of everything, right? How long is it taking to set up?
Right.
What is the performance? What is the cost? Everything.
Right.
And Bedrock is always tricky. Uh,
Ah,
and not in just terms of starting with it. I think the DevX there is
okay.
definitely a bit higher, but especially when you go in a big org, right? Let's say Postman,
Right.
there's a bunch
Right.
of AWS permissions is like uh, a place where you don't want to go.
Right.
It takes forever to just authorize particular
Right.
service for your user. And then the
Right.
other bit is integrations, right? Because, for
Right.
example, I'm using some API gateway. For example, we use Portkey at Postman, which is like an
Okay.
AI gateway for different models. Now,
Right.
just
Right.
having that integration between Bedrock and Portkey is a nightmare.
Ah,
Portkey just allows you to do it via access keys, but
right.
let's say Postman is enforcing an RBAC-based access. Now you have to go to Portkey, ask them, oh, can you prioritize this feature? But they have 10 other enterprise customers to like attend
Right.
to. Then they'll just go and say, oh, just add a custom host. We have that option. So you have to set up a Bedrock option as a
Right.
custom host. And I think that also affects your integrations down the line, not just your individual experience as a developer with the platform. That's
Right.
definitely there. But then I've also seen that if you have enough, if you show promise of enough usage, enough
Right.
dollars being churned, then I
Right.
think AWS is also very generous putting their people onto it. They'll
Right.
help you set everything up and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not sure if everybody has the same experience, but with big accounts, I
Right.
think you can pull that off.
Definitely. No, I think you're bang on point. I'm sure, when we release this episode, AWS Bedrock and the generative AI team, I think is a growing one. It's actually a pretty impressive team. I know friends and former coworkers who are working there. So yeah, your feedback could be a real, customer feedback. Probably they're listening to it. And
I
personally,
hope
I've
so.
worked with yeah, personally, I've worked with the SageMaker team. I know some of the product leads there. I'm pretty sure they will take this, customer feedback as a really important one. But also another thing to keep in mind, I think not just Bedrock, but like all the managed Gen AI applications, I guess, or services, I guess, is they are pretty much like how probably SageMaker was 10 years back. It was pretty rocky.
Yes.
Now it's pretty smooth.
Yes.
So I think you are like a very early adopter. So I think your feedback is extremely valuable to them. I will let
Yeah,
you
I
know
think
if
so.
we if we have any feedback. Excellent. That was a very nice answer. Next question, I think you already touched upon a lot of points. So if you have any other points here, how do you optimize LLMs for inference speed and minimize latency in production, especially when dealing with large models and high request volumes? I think this is one of the most searched, questions. You don't look at it when you're building a proof of concept and everything, but inference speed and latency is one thing that your customer is actually going to be affected by. So, any tips or yeah,
Yes, I think one thing is obviously the first thing you should look at, and definitely this will only come once you scale to a certain usage, is can I avoid a request to the model altogether?
mm,
Because your most expensive, so let's say it's your client, your app talking to your backend services, and your backend services are talking to some model hosted somewhere, some model service. Your
right,
first question should be the biggest cost center here is the model service because it's on a quadratic
right,
complexity. And in general, if it's a shared infra, then you have no guarantees over response times and so on.
right,
So your first aim should always be, oh, where can I cut down on my calls? And that is going to
right,
help you with obviously performance as well as cost. Examples for that, obviously, one is what Copilot did, which is like just a 7 parameter logistic regression model and just filter out most requests. If you know the user is not accepting most completions, then maybe they don't need one unless they explicitly
right,
ask for it. So you just stop triggering the model. These are nitbits you can do. Uh, Given that you are now actually going into the space where the request has to be made, I think caching is a brilliant, brilliant thing wherever applicable. It's
mhm,
not always applicable, but I've seen even small, like 3 member, 4 member team saving couple $1,000 on their bills just by caching the right things.
right,
Uh, Obviously, when you reach at Copilot level scale, caching is, I think, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm assuming it's almost as high as 70 to 80%. Uh,
right,
and that just changes the equation quite a bit.
right,
Given that none of this is going to work for you, let's say just you're just starting out, you don't have a big enough cache store or something like that.
mhm,
Uh, I think you obviously there's a bunch of big levers you can pull, which is model size, prompt size.
right,
I think these are
right,
the uh, two most important bits. Even
right,
within prompts, I think output responses, if you can keep it short somehow,
right,
maybe by UX tricks, smart
mhm,
loading states, you're processing it in batches or streaming somehow.
right,
That can also help a bit. I think these are the
mhm,
biggest two levers. And then beyond that, you can always pull up big compute. You
right,
can quantize your models. I think it's
right,
usually the standard the tricks and tips that I can like just share. Nothing
right,
uh, unusual as such. But uh, I will say performance. For many use cases, performance is actually very important. For example,
right,
autocomplete, yes, it is important, but
right,
I will still always benchmark your performance not with the baseline of this being magical or this being a
right,
wow factor. Oh, it just did
right,
this in 2 seconds, and that's crazy. Always
right.
benchmark it with the number of hours saved or number of minutes saved if this task was
Mm,
done manually. Because sometimes
right,
what happens is, and this has happened, when you complete something super fast and it's a bit
right,
long,
right,
the user also gets a bit confused. Oh, what just happened? And if the
right,
UX is not right, now how do I go through this entire thing which has happened so fast?
right,
And it becomes a bit tricky. So that can also happen on the other side. Uh,
right,
and they're perfectly okay if you do it over 4 minutes or 5 minutes over 3 or 4 different calls, going step by
right,
step, so that they are
right,
in loop. And if it's saving them a day of work or a couple of days of work, they're okay spending those 5, 10 minutes. So I think
right,
from a product perspective, do not like greedily go behind performance without thinking about the broader product
right,
goals.
right.
And if you have to, then I think the playbook over there is also pretty standard. There's like, I don't think I'll have anything novel to share as such.
No, no, I think what you mentioned is gold because from an engineering perspective, your metric could be, yeah, the fastest time that I want the response from, but from purely from a customer experience perspective, getting the customer
Yes.
along with the journey and then giving them that, that satisfaction or whatever um, I think your point is bang on, which is a product lesson 101. And great points you brought up was one, caching, which I think you have now. You have a lot of tools and everything to do that. And the other 2 points you mentioned was pretty basic. Start with your model size and your prompt size and everything. Um, Excellent. I think very clear-cut takeaways. This is awesome. And I really like the way you are actually crafting the answers. It's not like a like a summary. You're not like a summarization model. You're actually a those are very, very clear-cut takeaways. So that's awesome. Great. Um, I think the next question is on monitoring and maintaining LLMs in production. I have asked a very almost the same question to the last guest as well. So I'm curious to know your answer. Best practice for monitoring and maintaining LLMs in production. If you have any tools or anything in mind, and how do you detect any issues that comes up, like model degradation, or suddenly you have an unexpected behavior? How do you tackle that?
Yes, I think model degradation is something which is completely, I mean, it's more in your control. If you're not bumping your
Right,
versions, you can assume it's the same set of
right,
weights that are being hit.
right,
Uh, that is obviously one thing. There are, from time to time, there are rumors that, oh, this model has been now, I don't know, maybe it has been quantized or something has happened and performance is off now. I think it's
right,
mostly psychological. It shouldn't
right,
theoretically be possible. Uh,
right,
if you're not bumping it, then it's fine. In case you're actually switching models, I think you should have your regression test in place. And
right.
uh, I would still say rather than reacting to the first spike or dip you see on your charts or your dashboards,
Hmm.
I will say please always put more trust in your internal regression test. I think that should be your
Right,
first uh, like the first thing you check when you're switching models or like changing models or just bumping up a version or something.
right,
Because sometimes these spikes are just spikes or these dips are just dips.
right,
You cannot. It's very difficult to attribute it to a model change.
right,
There are, I mean, there's obviously output quality evals or your AI, the evals which are running on top of the content that the LLM or your AI service is generating. There's
right,
also different degradations which are, I think, more frequent and a bit out of your control, which is sometimes
right.
services just go down.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes what happens is there are AI models being used which you're not aware of. For example, if you use Azure OpenAI, you are by default enrolled into their moderation endpoint. Uh,
Right,
Now, you might be using the same GPT-4o model launched in last Jan or something, and that's fine. But maybe their moderation models, which are essentially a series of classification models, they are
right,
being switched, and you're not always up to date. They are not very public about it. Uh,
right,
and it's a series of models, right? Maybe we don't know. It's maybe 15, 20 models down the line. It's a big tree of classifiers. Even if one of
right,
them changes, maybe it's starting to flag some particular prompt as a code. This happens very often with coding assistants, is that it
okay,
tries everything. It often has false positives for things like injection attacks or jailbreaking attacks or
right,
cybersecurity threats. These moderation APIs do usually give false positives for that.
right,
And this is the change log you don't usually track. Now, suddenly you're
right,
seeing a bunch of 500s and on your service and you
right,
don't know what's happening. Uh, I think these kind of issues are a bit out of your control. Similar thing
right,
for downtimes as well. OpenAI will sometimes
right.
just go down for hours or
Yeah,
something or the other will happen. In that case, I
right,
think the best thing is just implement fallbacks.
correct.
Uh, if you're, let's say, primarily using OpenAI, just get an Azure OpenAI fallback. It's the same model
Right,
with maybe a different costing or different performance numbers,
right,
but it's good as a fallback.
right,
And if it's to a smaller model, I think it's fine. You can handle a bunch of poor quality outputs over 500s because 500 or even a 400 on your APIs is going to show a
mhm,
error state on your app, which is the
right,
worst experience because that tells user, oh, this product is broken. A
right,
broken product is way worse. It's like an immediate trigger for a user churn. You can
right,
always ask the user to reprompt or continue a conversation for longer with poor
right,
responses, but you
right.
should not terminate the experience. So
Yeah,
I think fallbacks and routing, I think, are the easiest
right,
solutions for that. And
right,
in terms of output quality itself, it can be fairly simple. You can have real-time evals. If
Right.
you want to automate it, you can do LLM as a judge. You can do string matches. You obviously
Right.
have the user feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down. You
Right.
also have client analytics. Client analytics is beautiful. It's like the richest source of data you have. To give
Okay.
you an example, let's take autocomplete, right?
Okay.
And I'll share a blog with you, and you can
Yeah.
link that in your description or
Yeah.
something. But it
Yeah.
kind of reverse engineers the whole Copilot autocomplete extension, and it goes into every module, like where is the telemetry implemented, what data are they tracking,
Okay.
where is the model call being logged, and that is where I found out about the uh, seven
The seven
parameter.
seven
Yes,
model. Nice.
I never knew that myself.
That's
But
gold.
uh,
Yeah.
client analytics is beautiful because if you
Okay.
look at thumbs up, thumbs down data in your, let's say,
Right.
chatbot, and
Right.
it that also comes up for completion sometime. Are you happy with this
Right.
completion?
Right.
My personal experience at Postman, I've seen just 0.5% or 0.4% of requests actually receive a feedback. Not many
Okay.
people or users do the effort of reporting feedback.
Right.
And even within that, it's mostly negative feedback. You rarely capture
Right.
positive feedback.
Right.
So you have to automatically mine feedbacks from client analytics by user behavior. For example,
Right.
if I'm showing autocomplete suggestion, is the user clicking tab, pressing tab and accepting it? If it
Right.
is being accepted, then it's most likely a right suggestion. If they're hitting escape and just
Right.
discarding the suggestion, it's a negative suggestion and it's
Right.
you're indirectly capturing feedback.
Correct.
Similarly, if they've accepted a suggestion and it's staying in your code for a day or for 2 days, for 3 days, or maybe for a couple of commits or pull requests, you know that
Right.
that code is really good. It is there to stay in the code base for long. And
Right.
these kind of analytic events really, really help you a lot. And from what I remember,
Right.
I had a principal research manager at Microsoft, and the kind of
Okay.
dashboards he used to look at, he was the primary contributor behind Intel Code in Visual Studio. And the
Okay.
kind of dashboards and metrics they look at is never,
Yeah.
it's never some output quality event or something. It's always client analytics. What is the user behavior? What are they
Nice.
doing? I think those are
Okay.
the best dashboards to look at over. Similarly for Postman, right? If I'm doing
Right.
API debugging, I will
Right.
never see was it posting the right fix or not. I'll never do LLM as a judge or some
Right.
eval and monitor that. I'll monitor
Right.
how many 200 OKs am I getting for my APIs where Postbot is
Mm.
being used. How many
Okay. Okay.
400s am I avoiding where Postbot is being used? So if you tie that
Okay.
to your end goal, I think that's the best way to do it. Monitoring and
Uh,
uh, yeah.
that's excellent. I think one of the best answers that I've heard. You didn't go through some of the metrics and this and that and tools and everything pretty much from like a first principles perspective. I think the best takeaway is the client analytics that you mentioned. Go through the behavior, go through the customer behavior,
Yes,
quantify that, and that is your eval basically.
exactly.
um,
Yes.
Awesome. So the next question, this is on LLM toolings, APIs and integration. Postbot, which is the product, one of the products you worked on, it mentions it utilizes agent tools and actions. So I think this goes back to LLM agents and actions, how they work. So can you elaborate, if possible, if it's not a secret sauce, on some of the technical details of how these tools work, the agents work within the LLM framework, and how is that integrated with the core LLM?
Yes, I think it's pretty open. I mean, we have a
Okay,
technical blog describing Postbot as well, and I've
right,
talked about it at a bunch of events explaining how it works.
right,
It is actually very, very simple. It's just a very basic uh, LLM, chat LLM plus tools kind of a setting.
okay,
Uh, the interesting bit is we started way early. Back then, even the term agent was not very like mainstream.
right,
And the first version of Postbot that I built was just an OpenAI playground with the Assistants API they had, and it was very new. I think it was a
right.
couple days old. It was in beta, and I was
Nice,
just the first Postbot I built was in OpenAI playground, and I demoed it to our CTO and co-founder and so on. Everybody was amazed.
nice,
So
nice.
we soon found out though that you cannot uh, like just leave it unattended, unbound.
Right,
Uh, and that is the concept that we came up with, which is like controlled autonomy. Yes, we do want it
right,
to be autonomous. We do
right,
want it to take actions,
right,
but it has to be controlled purely because that is where the current foundational tech is. Maybe down the line, if it evolves, we'll give it more and more autonomy. But right now, it has to be
right,
controlled autonomy. And
right,
the vision with which Postbot was started was that can we, and the team was really awesome. It was the Postman
Right.
Labs team. It was like a 0 to 1 team internally. And the
Okay.
vision was pretty wild. This was way early. This was like around GPT-3 or 3.5. The vision
Right.
was maybe this is going to evolve into something fascinating. Maybe natural language is the new UX. And can we
Right.
get rid of pixel-based UI? Can we get rid of GUI?
Right.
And can we just have LLMs as the UX? And then what
Wow.
that
Okay.
essentially means is every click, every navigation in the Postman application has to be an LLM action or an AI action that you can communicate via speech or typing or whatever it is, right? Via language.
Okay.
Uh, that was the vision, obviously. A bit too grand, but that is how I think these things work, the 0 to 1
Right.
settings. And
Right.
then we said we'll just ride the wave of foundational tech. Wherever it is, we'll just leverage the best thing. And
Right.
as soon as the assistant split API was out, I was on the playground and it's time to build things. And
Right.
I quickly realized, oh, you can model actions within the app as tools, as API calls, because it is
Right.
essentially every click, every key
Right.
press is mapping back to an API within your
Hmm.
app or backend, and we can do that. And that is how we started. So there's a tool for adding tests, there's a tool for collecting information, there's a tool for searching on the Postman API network, there's a tool for
Right.
adding documentation. And now this will slowly expand. So one thing was we always treated ourselves as the platform team or the
Right.
Postbot team, and we
Right.
developed the architecture in such a way, and I think that was super impressive because
Right.
uh, there was a lot of like far-sightedness that we came up with, which was like, can other teams integrate easily their actions and their UXs as AI actions within Postbot? Can we implement it in that way? And the whole tool
Right.
calling uh, paradigm was super suitable for that. And the
Right.
other bit was we even thought about multi-agent architectures. If tomorrow search team wants its own search agent, can it just integrate a search agent? And that again is a
Right.
different LLM call or an API call, which can be modeled as a tool. So we covered everything. We covered planning, we covered multi-agent architecture. We just didn't know it back then. These were the terms
Right.
that were going to come
Right.
up, but we did it. And back then, Auto GPT was a thing when it came to
Right.
agents. I think that was the only thing. It used to write a plan, like a
Right.
point-wise plan, and it used to execute it, but it was very uncontrolled.
Right.
And we tried that, which was like full autonomy, or even autogen for that matter, where
Right.
LLM is the controller.
Correct.
Those are full autonomy. And then you had your traditional RPAs, which were like no autonomy, completely hard coded. We knew we
Right.
had to be somewhere in between, which was controlled autonomy. And that is what we
Right.
did. And we
Right.
quickly realized it's going to be a state machine based thing where you have to
Right.
act, observe, again, predict the next action, and so on.
Right.
And we did that. It worked very well. We were out to all 35 million users by January, I think, of
Wow.
2024. And and now you have LangGraph and all these things, which are
Correct.
essentially giving you a framework to build that. But back then, we
Right.
just implemented
You guys
everything
built
from
your own.
scratch. Yeah, and
Wow.
and coding it is, I mean, easy because you have assistants and
Right.
everything. But coming up with the concept and the architecture, I
Right.
think that
Right.
was pretty impressive as well.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just that, but we were early, and that's the only
Right.
highlight over there.
That is so impressive. Like you guys building like an agent chain even before you have these, LangGraph and Crew AI and everything, all these stuff. I'm curious if you are still use or if you know if they're still using it or they are if you would prefer moving to
Um,
more like a standardized um
No, I think, see, you can fork a framework and take it from there. You cannot
right.
always rely on a framework because, again,
Uh
I think iteration and development, shipping speed is the most important bit.
right.
And most of these frameworks are very cluttered with abstractions, which is, I think, good for POCs,
Right.
required even. But
Right.
for production deployments, especially when you hit a blocker or a breaking change or something like that, it becomes a nightmare.
Right.
Uh, so you can fork it, maybe you can take it from there, or you can even implement it from scratch. It is not that difficult. The
Right.
orchestration itself, what might be difficult is, let's say, persistence. How do you save your conversations? You'll have to host a DB somewhere,
Right.
lock conversations there. That part is a bit difficult, but that is an
Right.
engineering task, which is fine. You'll
Correct.
hire good engineers and you can solve it.
Right. This is mighty impressive. I think probably you would have given talks. Like I know I see in your website like there are talks on like the Portkey meetup and everything. But
Yes.
just this topic is a whole different probably an episode.
Yeah,
uh, uh,
maybe.
but
Yes.
but yeah, that was amazing. I think a lot of takeaways, very specific takeaways, in terms of um, how do you think about agents and tools? Like modularize it and then make sure you have like a longer, like vision and longer time frame vision, so that you suddenly something
Yes.
changes, you can still incorporate all your work. Great. I think the next question, you actually started answering a little bit of this, um, and this is specifically for a lot of existing enterprises which have never used AI, as an applied AI. They are now looking to, how do you productionize Gen AI? So, how can LLMs be effectively integrated with existing workflows, services, and APIs in production setting? And what are the key API design considerations for exposing this LLM functionality? So, so the context is, if you are like a large enterprise, like a really like say 100-year-old enterprises where you don't have, say, an AI application yet.
Yes. I think so there's really two ways to look at this, right? One is
Right,
how are you implementing your API design for your AI services itself? That is one
right,
thing.
right,
Other is you will be integrating with a lot of non-AI APIs as well. Maybe let's say web
right,
search or something like that. And that
right,
is important bit of your uh, entire architecture.
right.
Uh, so it goes two ways, right? So when you're, I think one key decision that now API publishers have to make is obviously API is the way you interact with the digital world out there as LLM in a
Right,
structured and predictable manner. You
right,
have to make your APIs a bit agent friendly now. And some people are really catching on to this very early. For example, Stripe,
right.
if you look at Stripe APIs, uh, every time you hit a 400, it will actually give you a very descriptive reason or a guess about why this 400 has come up. And it's
Ah,
not meant for a human developer, but it's meant for an
right,
agent who's calling the Stripe API. And it will also give you a link to relevant pages in the documentation where you can actually
right,
go and look up how to fix this particular issue or change something in your payload.
right.
So they're actually sending much more interactive information now. That is one bit. Another
Right,
bit is obviously once you have your this is integrating software 1.0 APIs into your AI services. And
right.
then how do you productionize your AI service as an API, I think is one bit. I think uh, most products today are still on generative AI products are still on conversational interface
Right, yeah,
or on a completion interface. I think these are the
right,
two kind of use cases we have. Uh, for completion, I think it is all about performance.
right,
You you have to unfortunately you have to go and tackle performance, and I think over
right,
there uh, you will run into uh, you will have to actually very properly address queuing, concurrency, all these things, even
right,
batching if that is required.
right.
That is one bit. Other bit is obviously you have to do a lot of routing based on your load and essentially load balancing, right? I think that is
Right,
also uh, that becomes an infra level problem. It's got nothing to
right,
do with your design as such.
right,
And when it comes to your conversational kind of UXs, I think the API design there, especially if it's an inline in-app kind of a copilot, I think it has to be very tightly coupled with your app. For example, if we go back to the last point where we
mhm,
had postbot agent tools and actions. So the
right,
way we send actions are actually action has some AI generated content. Plus, it also has some series of or an array of keywords which map
right,
to certain action in the app. For example, one action can just be open the test editor and then
right,
add content into it.
mhm,
Other action can be just minimize the test editor, open up the request body editor, and add request body into it. You are actually manipulating UI on behalf
right,
of the user.
right,
That is a very important bit in in-app assistant. Same for Copilot as well, right? If Copilot is sending a code edit, it has to actually
right,
trigger an action saying, "Oh, show this particular diff in this particular area of my editor." Uh,
right.
or if it is beyond my current live viewport, maybe I'm on my screen, I'm seeing lines 8 to 10, 8 to
Right,
let's say 20, but the actual
right,
edit is let's say in some different file or maybe a bit downwards in the existing file. It has to actually say, go scroll to that location or open that
right,
file up and
right,
then So now you can't just say, oh, I can just do some stuff on the back end and give
Right,
it to my front end developers and they'll work with it. You have to be very aware about
right,
what the front end implementation looks like, what are the modules over there,
right,
what can be abstracted out into actions and so on. And it will
right,
have its own place in your response schema.
right.
And it is not that easy because you have to find a state where certain actions are allowed, not allowed. If I'm in the
Correct.
search product within Postman, I cannot be sending an action for, let's say, something related to testing. In that case, I have
Right.
to say, oh, seems like you are in the search product. If you want to do testing, maybe you go to testing window and try to use Postbot again. So uh,
Ah,
you have to be very careful about that. And obviously, if it's just a standalone conversational product, not integrating to any app, like let's
right,
say ChatGPT or Perplexity, then I think
right.
the API design is fairly simple. You just
Fairly
need
simple.
to persist with a conversation ID or something like that, which can then look up the conversation history, and you
Right,
just continue your conversation. I think that is fairly
right,
trivial. That's
right,
that bit is a bit easy. Uh,
right.
yeah, I think that's all the kind of architecture I've had experience with. So
Okay.
uh, there are
No, this
interesting
is
things too.
awesome. Whatever points you brought up, I think clearly highlights the importance of like technical product design. Like before you go on to implement your entire pipeline, even before say uh, the technical bits, you think about how does the like the workflow of the customer
Yes.
or the end user. I think it's interesting because in traditional ML, like, when we work on traditional ML products, we don't generally think a lot about, how is the user going to use this, how are they going to interact this, but it has become super important when it comes to Gen AI applications. Um,
Yep.
uh, Again, I think so many takeaways from that. Um,
Uh, I think
yeah,
this
yeah, go.
one very important takeaway I missed is
Okay,
that uh, you would want to ideally keep as many control as possible on your backend and not on your client or app.
okay,
And I'll tell you the reason for this. This is a fairly new tech.
okay,
Things are going to break. You are going to
yeah,
ship stuff that is breaking.
yeah,
And uh, even without that, you're expected to move fast.
right,
Now your app releases, it's very difficult to roll them back. Once you have, let's say, I've released Postman V11.1 and
yeah,
already 5 billion users are on it. Now it's very difficult for us to get them back to 11.2 if there's a mistake or
right,
bump them to 11.2. It's completely up to them. But if I have
right,
control on my backend, I can easily push a fix. And
right.
this is exactly why you don't hard code your AI actions in the client. You hard code it on your backend and then send it to your client who can just consume it. But if there's
Uh,
something
uh,
wrong, you
right,
have the control
right,
or a
right.
way to
A
fix
very
it or
subtle
change
difference,
it on the
but
backend.
right,
Yes, it's very important for iteration speed or for rollbacks and rollouts and so on. Keep
right,
as much control as possible on the backend. And you can do all sorts of things on front end. You can have feature flags and all those things that you can ship with your
right,
release. That's
right,
fine. But
right.
keep control on backends. I think that is really
Uh,
important.
Nice. It shows the war wounds probably that you have seen with with the
Definitely.
way you're like, yes, this is one important point I missed.
It's super
No,
important. Yeah.
excellent. I think that's a great point. Again, as we talked before, I think we don't think a lot about this when we're designing. If you're like a first time, like builder of these applied Gen AI products, but coming from like a practitioner like you, like who has seen the, uh, as I said, war wounds. This seems to be very on point. Excellent.
Yes.
Continuing on the similar lines, your thoughts on versioning. How do you manage versioning and updates of the LLMs or your LLM applications in production um, while minimizing disruption to users? I think your previous point of doing the changes in the back end and not in the front end. I think that's
Yes.
probably one answer. If any other points, like do you have any like favorite tools or
Yeah. I think there's no favorite as such. You can use anything really. It's not that complicated. But obviously,
right,
again, it comes back to that point. As an AI team, do you want to build or do you want to buy and move fast, right? So If there is something that is helping you, then just go for it. If it's costing
Right.
you a bit more, I think it's fine. Uh, in terms of versioning, I think there's two, especially when it comes to LLMs, there's two versionings that you need to address. One is obviously the model versioning, which is fine.
Right.
You can always choose not to change as long as this
Right.
model is going fine.
Right.
Uh, Other is the prompt versioning, right?
Right.
You will have to maybe over time update your prompts based on
Right.
outputs you're seeing and so on. I think
Right.
it always helps if you isolate your prompt versioning from your code version control.
Right.
uh, it really helps. Also, what you can do is you can split your prompt as well into prompt partials. I think that also really helps a lot. Maybe your
Ah.
prompt instructions are the same, but you want to change a few short
Right.
examples. Uh, can you do that? Can you have
Right.
prompt partials, have their own versions, and can you fetch them from an external? It shouldn't be hard coded on your service code because if I'm shipping, let's
Right.
say, I'm pushing my code release or my backend release to Beanstalk or something, it's gone. Now I cannot change
Right.
my prompt. If I have to change
Right.
even a small minor thing in the prompt, I have to re-release the entire service,
Right.
which is a bit tricky. But what you can do is, for example, there are products for this. We have used Portkey. There's
Okay.
also this other one called Maxim, and I actually tried a bunch of them. I tried at least 10 or 12 such products. I tried Prompt Layer, I tried
Okay.
Galileo. All of them support these prompt libraries. They also
Right.
support prompt partials. You can do your independent versioning there, and everything gets
Right.
locked to a specific version, whether it's
Right.
evals, metrics, whatever. And you can
Right.
then, there are webhooks. So the webhooks keep on consistently looking for the latest version. And you
Right.
can, even if my service is deployed, it's live, I want to change the prompt, I can change it on Portkey or
Right.
Maxim or whatever it is. And my service will start fetching the latest thing from Portkey or Maxim without
Right.
requiring a fresh release. So I think
Right.
that really helps. And then
Yeah.
again, obviously, breaking a prompt into partial also really helps a lot, giving you more
Right.
control. In
Right.
terms of change itself, I think one phrase that you mentioned was disruption to users.
Right.
Uh, there should always be a controlled rollout for any AI feature, I feel, however small it is, even if it's like just
Right.
one word being removed from a prompt.
Right.
These are, at the end of the day, unpredictable systems. You don't know. You're
Right.
hitting a black box API. Be very careful.
Right. Right.
So do a controlled rollout. API gateways do have that. Like Portkey has it. You can
Right.
do like 1%, 2%. You can do a manual rollout.
Right.
Even with traditional tools, you can go for it. You have feature flags with launch darkly and so on. You can control
Right.
rollouts from there as well. So whatever works
Right.
for you, but do a control rollout. Give it some time, maybe observe for a day or two. And this has to be
Right.
a weekday, obviously.
Right.
So because this happens, people just say, "Oh, I'll just
Right.
test on weekends when there's no traffic," but then it's no use because it's not quality traffic. So
Right.
do a control rollout, and then I
Right.
think you should be good over time. Yeah.
Awesome. No, I think all great points. I see that you Portkey was a repeating tool that came up in your answer. Um, I would definitely, put a link to the tools that you have mentioned. I got introduced to your profile actually through following Portkey in LinkedIn, I think. So it's very
Oh, I
interesting.
see.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very interesting, obviously, a company coming out of India. So I think that's great. Um, uh, Also, you mentioned Launch Darkly. I think another great product. I think a lot of product folks would have seen the talk by, I think she's the CTPO, like the Chief Technology and Product Officer, who had a great talk recently in Lenny's podcast and Lenny's like conference, well-known product personality, where I think the title of the talk was "Product Management is going to be dead," or something along those lines. She's also, I think, the author of Chat PRD, which is a very famous a tool available in the open in the ChatGPT marketplace. So yeah, awesome, great. I think great answer. I'll put the links to all the tools that you mentioned. Yeah, so I think now moving on to some real world applications and challenges, from your experience. You may have covered already some of the points to, answers to the questions, but if there are anything else. Can you share specific examples of successful LLM deployments in production and what made them successful? Um, and what were the key learnings and challenges encountered? So obviously, we talked about your GitHub chat assistant and your Postbot. So were there any aha moments or like great successful outcomes that you are really proud of and there were great takeaways? And if there are any challenges that you want to highlight.
I mean, yes, I mean, definitely with new LLMs coming up, there have been a lot of like aha moments or like wow moments.
Right.
Also, at times, it has meant that months of work for carefully feature crafting and training models has gone
Right.
down the drain. So, uh, to give like some personal anecdotes, when I started my research fellowship at Microsoft, I was working with the Visual Studio and .NET team for code migration tasks.
Hmm.
Most of the .NET community is still on .NET framework, and they have now released .NET Core, which is like a much modern version of it, and it's actually really great.
Okay.
But the inertia of the legacy code base is so large that nobody is migrating to .NET Core that fast. Even internal
Okay.
Microsoft orgs, let's say 365 org is one of the biggest org in Microsoft. They had like a
Hmm.
78% backlog on .NET framework in terms of migration, and they were already 13, 14 months behind timelines for migration, right? It's very tricky.
Okay.
And you're carefully crafting API change logs and getting all that documentation, doing user interviews with EMs and so on, and seeing how we
Right.
can use something like BERT or T5 or something like that and
Right.
get something working. And then comes this whole text Da Vinci model, and then
Right.
immediately with the Microsoft partnership, there's a code Da Vinci model with the GitHub data. And that was amazing because we were drafting like thousands and thousands of samples and with like just
Right.
three few shots. It wasn't instruct tuned very properly back then.
Right.
It was not even chat tuned. So you had to give few shots and it used to autocomplete. Uh,
Yeah.
so it was purely in context learning, but even that was super powerful. And
Right.
so 6 months of effort, it was a 12-month fellowship. 6 months of effort was into the context
Wow.
gathering and the data collection bit, and that was gone. And then immediately I just shifted to contributing to the product itself. I was writing AI was for Copilot. So
Right.
uh, that was
I
nice.
mean, that
Yeah,
think I mean that is awesome. Definitely makes a great story, but I'm sure when you actually saw that in real time, like you would have had
yes.
multiple feelings.
I mean, it was still fine because I was fairly new to that project. Even if six
Right.
months, I was still new. There were people working for more than 18, 20 months on it, and I really felt
Oh,
sorry for them. So,
right.
uh, yeah,
Uh,
it was, but that was really eye-opening, I would say.
okay.
If you ask anyone to use Code DaVinci 2 or Text DaVinci 2 today, they'll just frown and say, "What stupid thing is
What's that?
this? This is not, yeah, this is not usable at all." But back then, it seemed super powerful.
Right.
Um, and then even at Postman, right? As soon as I joined Postman, obviously I was the first AI hire at Postman, and I think
Right.
the only AI hire so far. So one big task
Right.
was obviously building that AI or ML culture in the org. And as soon
Right.
as I came in, they had a beta version of Postbot, and there was no tool calling, so you had to
Right.
deploy intent classifier in between, which is to route to the right LLM chain.
Right.
And if I was doing horrible, right? It was like 28% accuracy. It was a BART model
Right.
deployed on some very expensive GPU instance, which is costing like thousands of dollars every day.
Right.
And the accuracy was 28%, and the response time was like not that great as well, right? It was a big model.
Okay.
And I put a lot of effort into that as well. I sat down and annotated my own data, developed like data annotations, rubrics, distributed it across annotators, trained annotators, got the data
Right.
quality up to a certain mark, trained a Distilbert, I think it was a deBerta model, very small model, got the
Okay.
accuracy up to 85, 86%, and it was really great for two
Okay.
months. And then we had the tool calling capability come in, and then suddenly, you didn't have to train your model every 2 months. You didn't have to collect
Um,
data. You could just do tool calling and identify intents. So tool calling was again very eye-opening for me as well as the capability. I knew it's going to change a lot of things. And we immediately got rid of the classifier. We are not going to host any model, even if it is as small
right.
as that intent classifier. We started calling the LLM APIs and intent classification was already solved. So that was
Wow.
also very awesome. Again, in hindsight, like if you tell anyone, oh, tool calling is awesome, they'll say, oh, what's so special about it? Every LLM API has it. But back then,
Right.
that was not the case. For a very long time, only OpenAI had tool calling for very
Right.
specific models.
Right.
So, uh, and now it's very powerful, right? Because now you have
Right.
agents and all these libraries working on top of tool calling or even structured outputs
Right.
working on top of tool calling. So it's super powerful. I think these were two very eye-opening moments.
Yeah.
LLM deployments as such, I don't think I've really seen a deployment firsthand myself. It has already always
Okay.
been an API that I'm hitting.
Right.
So it's mostly these frontier models that we all use that I've seen.
Okay. You just like living on the edge, don't you? Like, it's been
I mean,
in it's
yes, I
been
mean, I do believe we are the curve is so that you have to be on the edge.
right.
You definitely can't be lagging. It's okay if you're not on
Right.
edge, but you can't say, oh, I'm going to fine tune with this particular tech right now, and that's going to be it. No, you have to assume things are going to be
Right.
drastically different, even 2 quarters down the line. I mean, they're already
Right.
there. It's just not out yet, right? It's
Right.
maybe it's under red teaming or something. You don't know.
Right.
But so I think it is a default choice that you have to make. There's no other
Right.
option.
It's a great time to be an AI engineer. And the time is so warped, right? Like it's not like,
Yes,
10 years back or even 5 years back. It's not like that. It's like, oh, a couple months back. So,
exactly.
to your junior team members, you'd be like, you guys are having your life so easy. Uh,
Definitely. Yes.
but clearly, that's the reason why you would probably be like leading a team or anything because kind of understand, the how the sausage is made, not just, you know, the end product. So, awesome.
Yes.
I think really funny and very realistic and in hindsight very funny, but I can understand how um interesting it would have been.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome. I think the next question is, how can LLMs be used to empower users and improve their quality of life in real world applications? And what are the potential risks and challenges that you see with widespread adoption? Like, just your thought on, where it could be, best used. It could be, like geography specific, or it could be domain specific. Like, where do you think, you do it here and you will have like, 100x return? Yeah.
Right. I think one use case is obviously it's very general and I think it's already been validated is just use a LLM as a knowledge store. Uh,
Right.
a couple of years ago, and now it feels very distant in the past, but there was this there was this New York, I think it was a NYT article or something which said ChatGPT is a blurry JPEG of the web or something like that. That was the title.
Right. Right.
And it essentially meant you're just compressing the entire internet into this 175 billion parameters.
Right.
I think that is super powerful because knowledge in general was very tricky to access.
Right.
Even with web search, it wasn't that easy. Uh, it has now become very convenient, especially if you look at the distribution channels where ChatGPT is a LLM free to use hosted on a website or even an
Right.
app right now, right? You have an application.
Right.
And now you have even deeper distributions. You have LLMs coming in WhatsApp and so on. And
Yep.
I see people like who have just started using touchscreen phones. Maybe it's my grandmother back here in India.
Right.
She's just started using touchscreens, so she's fairly new. Even she's
Right.
generating images with WhatsApp,
Well,
generating messages with WhatsApp, and that's the level of distribution is crazy. And
I know.
just compare it to a few years ago, you had to deploy this model on some GPU. You had to first fight for a GPU, and then you had to curl or do something. I don't know, SSH into the
Right.
server and get some outputs, wait for a
Right.
night, wake up in
Uh,
the morning, get some out. And that accessibility, I think, really makes
right.
it very ideal for knowledge tasks. I think that is
Right.
one very obvious use case.
Right.
I've personally benefited from it. I started consulting. I didn't know anything around contracts, around proposals, around taxation. I
Right.
tried hiring a lawyer. I tried hiring a CA. It was like It was very
Okay.
difficult. I just ended up
Okay.
drafting up my own contracts. I just ended up filing my own accounts and so on. And I just had Claude and ChatGPT on the side. And I was just
Right.
cross-checking, and I could do everything on my own. So
Right.
knowledge is, I think, the best use case. I think we severely underestimate that.
Right.
Um, Other is obviously productivity. What
Right.
is going to take you, let's say, a day or two.
Right.
Uh, Now, with LLMs, especially the LLMs which are uh, augmented with things like tool calling or multimodal support, I think
Right.
all these extra attributes or features on top of LLM APIs,
Mhm.
you're not changing the model, you're just changing the
Right.
API somehow, fine-tuning it
Right.
for some specific kind of inputs and outputs.
Right.
And but that is really unlocking a lot of reliable and structured interaction with the external digital world.
Right.
And what that means is anything that is under the digital realm, which is going to take you, let's say, X amount of time, with LLM
Right.
powered integrations, you can do it within, let's say, 1/10 or 100 of the time, right? Even
Exactly.
I go to my client meetings now, and right now the wave is agentic AI, which is exactly that LLMs interacting
Right.
with the digital world.
Right.
And uh, service as a software is the new economic like gold rush. And
Right.
you go to any client, and mostly this is like CEOs or CTOs of startups or like mid-stage companies and so on. And as a consultant, you ask them, what is it you're trying to get out of this effort? Let's say I build this
Right.
feature for you. How much
Right.
economic value does it unlock? Like, what is it you're trying to achieve?
Right.
And the kind of terminologies they use are a bit scary, but also at the same time a bit exciting as well. Because if I'm
Right.
going to, let's say, uh, any kind of, let's say, a data, let's say, customer support kind of a firm, uh,
Right.
and they'll say today, in order to cater to, let's say, 100 million users of this particular client, I have to
Mhm.
employ, let's say, 600 people in my call center who are working
Right.
12 hours a day. Can I take that down to, let's say, 100 people, which is a bit scary because now that is
Right.
job loss. Uh,
Right.
but they can only work for, let's say, 8 hours a day because now every request with Gen AI, with RAG and all these things, they are able to process every
Right.
request faster.
Yeah.
So that is productivity gain, and that is just possible because LLMs are being augmented in a way which is making it
Right.
easier to integrate them in the broader digital world.
Right.
So I think those are two bits. Anywhere there is a knowledge related task, I think that
Yeah.
is the biggest gain. And
Yeah.
anywhere there is any kind of productivity or time cost in terms of navigating a very complex multi-step long workflow in the digital world, I
Yeah.
think that also will get resolved a lot now with agentic automation.
Right.
And beyond that, I think robotics also is now catching up. So
Yeah.
we might actually see this translating from digital to physical world also really soon.
Right. Right.
With robotics coming up, multimodality being
Yeah.
added into these LLMs, I think that is also on the way.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Uh, Absolutely agreed. I think I think you're bang on in terms of when you gave the example of your grandmother using the cell phone. I have personally seen this a lot. Like information has always been there, but the access to that information or the modality through which you get that information has always been the problem. And
yes,
suddenly with this it has exploded like
yes,
and your example on the hiring a lawyer versus having your own contracts built,
yeah,
it, it's absolutely you can
exactly.
quantify that in dollars or in you can quantify that the actual cost saved, the actual time saved, and everything. So that's
Yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
it's huge. It's really huge. Yeah.
Right. No, absolutely. I do think it's going to be, like a static team size and number of agent size kind of future, which may be
Yes.
interesting. As you mentioned, it may shrink the team sizes. Engineering teams. All of these are knowledge based, so it's going to be interesting. Consulting. You have consultancies which charge a lot of money for basically for information access, so this is going to be
Yes.
very very interesting world. I think probably the penultimate section, very important one probably, is explainability, trust, and ethics. Like LLMs are getting more and more sophisticated. So how can we ensure they're transparent? Like, if you have any ideas or any thoughts on, what's right, what's not, and how can we increase the trustworthiness in the decision-making process? Yeah.
Yes, I think, and this is just a personal uh, opinion or belief, which might as well turn out to be wrong. But uh, I feel it's really, really difficult to control these things at a LLM level or at a model level or weights level because being someone who has been here before the whole LLM boom,
LLM
right?
mania. Yeah.
Or even before the BERT, even before the Transformer mania,
Right.
I've been hanging around since we were on RNNs.
Right.
So, and having studied like neural network theories, optimization theories, and so on, you understand the fundamental architecture uh, of the inference algorithm itself of these models, as well as the optimization algorithms
Right.
is inducing it to generalize and not to be accurate or reliable and so on. That is exactly the trade-off we are leveraging to get where we are today, where
Right.
ChatGPT is a single model with so much expertise and
Right.
like generalization, right? You can ask it anything, right? You can ask it,
Right.
uh, for example, how would a pirate sing the Indian national anthem? And that is nowhere and it's training data, but
Right.
it's able to do that compositional generalization because
Right.
that is what we are inducing while designing these algorithms for optimization and
Right.
inference.
Right.
And there's a clear trade-off. You're just saying ignore the realities, ignore uh,
Mm,
the fabric of the truth, and go
yeah.
beyond that, generalize. And that is
Yeah.
how you get the generalized capabilities. So I feel you can do rate teaming, you can do RLHF, you can do
Right.
all sorts of post-training. Products will always break. You
Mm,
have uh, you have entire GitHub repositories where system prompts are being leaked. It was the case with
yeah.
GPT-3.
Right.
It is still the case with GPT-4o and Claude 3 Opus and so on. Prompts are still being
Right.
leaked, no matter
Yeah.
how well you do rate teaming and so on. People are
Yeah.
still able to hack these products and do
Yeah.
ethically wrong things and so on, right? So it's
Yeah.
going to be there. You cannot handle this
Yeah.
at a LLM level. What you can do is at a product level, you can do certain things.
Mm,
Obviously, one other direction that is emerging now is just build independent filters, independent moderation
right.
APIs, and so on. That is one
Right.
thing when it comes to ethics and all those things.
Yeah.
But again, those are neural-based approaches in the end. So
Right.
even they can break. But
Right.
the hope is, I think, you distribute your checks around so many
Mm,
pieces that it becomes difficult to break all of them in one go. If you break one,
right.
the other one will catch it, and so on. I think
Right.
that is the game most people are playing.
Right.
So that's around ethics and how do you control model behavior and so on. I think that has to be done
Right.
at a product level.
Right.
In terms of transparency and trustworthiness,
Mm,
I think there are now the way to interact with this LLMs is essentially APIs. So
right.
you have to think of this at an API level and not at the LLM level again. I think the
Right.
APIs from leading frontier models are evolving now in such a way that is giving you that option. For example,
Right.
you have now a reasoning parameter in most Claude and OpenAI models where you can
Right.
see what exactly was the reasoning trace or the whiteboard work that the LLM has done
Right.
before giving the final output. I think
Right.
things that like that are going to help.
Right.
Again, going back to the example where we said with RAG, you need to add citations so that a user
Hmm.
can go back and check the sources themselves. I
Right.
think these are the kind of things which these APIs, whether it's VectorDB APIs or LLM APIs, are coming up with, which are really important for gaining user trust,
Right.
adding more transparency and trustworthiness in the outputs. So I
Right.
think that is the only way as of today.
Okay. Right.
We are already there. It's like it's not something that we have to expect. It's already out there. We can start using
Right.
it.
Right.
So yeah.
No, I think great answer. I think the point that you I think reiterated multiple times, which is I think the best takeaway here is protection at the product level rather than expecting protection from like the LLM level because
Yes.
no matter what, things are going to break there. I think the more filters you add to your particular use case, I think that would take you closer to production. Yes.
Yes,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
right. Awesome. Yeah, I think great answer. I think second question similar to it. Quick examples on tools if you have. So this is on explainability of LLM outputs. How do you think about it? For example, for traditional machine learning model like XGBoost and stuff, you have packages like SHAP and Lime and everything where you can explain why a particular prediction is so and so. It obviously gets more difficult as you go in neural networks, and now LLMs are a whole different frontier. So your thoughts, experience on it, have you found any tool that does LLM explainability really well? You have observability tools, a lot of those now, Arise AI, a lot of those. Curious to know what you have used or what you think about those.
Um, Explainability, uh, I've seen a bunch of articles and research papers
Mhm.
come from some of the top frontier labs.
Right,
Uh, Mostly when it's closed source labs like Anthropic, it's usually a blog saying, "Oh, we
right,
were able to trace this particular behavior to so and so activations in the model or so and so pieces of data in the pre-training corpus." Open
right,
source labs, I think there might be one or two tools. I
right,
haven't really gone too much into it. We never really had to.
right,
So.
right,
Uh, but I think back then, explainability was a bit easy because I've
right.
done this myself. So I was super into, I had plans for doing a PhD in NLP, and I was super into
Yes.
probing these models. So I used to probe for semantic grounding. I used to probe for
Right.
syntactic knowledge. I used to probe,
Hmm.
I've probed all the models like BERT, Roberta,
Okay.
XLM Roberta. I've probed all the models for different things. Uh,
Okay.
and that's actually a very good pattern that you see that the first few layers are
Right.
capturing syntax, the middle few layers are capturing
Hmm.
like semantics, and
Right.
it is very apparent. Those plots are beautiful. But that was
Right.
possible because you had access to the weights.
Hmm.
Uh, Now the broader community doesn't really have access to the weights.
Right.
It's just a black box API you're hitting, so it's a bit difficult because the only of interaction is text in, text out. Uh, Very difficult to build gradients, very difficult to run
Right.
computations, backprop and get that probing done.
Right.
Other thing is, even if you have open weights, it's very difficult to host them for a individual contributor or a small academic lab somewhere. So
Right.
even if it's available out there, it's not that easy to work with.
Right.
So in general, I think explainability has been a bit slow out in the open domain, but I
Right.
do remember people are still trying to do it. Either it's just on a text in, text out level. People try to put certain prompts, capture certain behavior. We have DSPY right now, right? So it's doing
Right. Right.
optimizations on a text level. So people are doing
Right.
that in
Right.
whatever way they can.
Right.
But I think it is a bit tricky. And personally, haven't really gone too deep into explainability of LLM outputs
Right.
as such.
Well, that's one way of putting it. You did mention you were thinking about a PhD in probing the NLP the architecture. So uh, it's awesome. I think that would make another episode in itself. Like it's a very obviously a deep and complex topic, but yeah,
Yes.
I think great to know your thoughts. It's definitely an evolving field. I'm curious to obviously follow your work and everything to figure out where things land here, I guess. I think the last question in this penultimate topic um, is about mitigating potential harms. So this question specifically is, ethical considerations around LLMs in production use case, and how can we mitigate, like specific, like harmful actions. It could. One interesting point that I got from my previous episode, from my conversation with, an engineer called Apurva Misra, she mentioned that one of the most important things was to look for malicious actors who are interacting with your apps, and then trying to either break it or trying to get it to behave in a different way or something. So how do you pre-plan for that and then say, okay, if the prompt length goes beyond so and so, then you're cut, like either you block the user or something if a number of times it happens, or do you simply fall back to a default like action from your app? Like how do you mitigate for active harmful um, actions? Yeah.
So I think when it comes to potential harms, right, obviously there is the ethical uh, aspect to it. And uh, there's also different kinds of harms. For example, you don't want your chatbot to make unnecessary promises or start
Right.
recommending competitors' products and so on.
Right.
Uh, I think there's two answers to this, right? One is at a
Right.
leadership level, where
Right.
you only care about, let's say, the business and the product and so on. I
Right.
think from what I've seen, usually there's not, I mean, there is obviously always certain fraction of malicious activity on your products, but
Right.
it's more often than not a big concern at the point because the time cost of investigating or investing into that is simply huge. And when it comes
Right.
to especially generative AI applications, uh, it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? You try to fix one small thing, and 10 different
Yeah.
things are
Yeah.
going to break, start start
Yeah.
start breaking, right? So usually I've seen teams just avoid that. But
Okay.
again, you are eventually liable for something. And if you're
Right.
building that, the easiest way to do that is just uh, use an enterprise-friendly platform like Azure OpenAI or Bedrock, and when you sign a
Right.
contract with them, they say that you have to mandatorily opt in for our moderation APIs, and in
Right.
turn, whatever legal consequences you face for your outputs, we are liable for it. I think
Right.
that is the from a leadership perspective, that is the easiest or the best. I think it is the best option you have right now.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
take an enterprise friendly offering, let the
Right.
experts handle
Right.
the whole bit. And if you look at Azure, they have content flags for prompt injections, prompt
Right.
leaking,
Right.
hate, abuse, all those things, right?
Right.
And they are taking care of it. It's like a dedicated team taking care
Right.
of it. And also legally you are at a peace of mind and you can actually focus on
Yeah.
your product development and feature development.
Right.
From an individual contributor perspective, let's say you are the person working at Azure and you are
Mm-hmm.
responsible for this. um, I think it is one of the toughest
Interesting
jobs.
role.
Yeah, it is one of the toughest jobs out there. um, One thing is, you understand how tough this is when you realize
Right.
that Azure actually logs all of the Azure OpenAI responses, keeps them on their servers for 30 days,
Right.
and many of those logs are actually manually reviewed by humans.
Right.
So Azure Moderation API, for example, has four levels of alerts. It's like safe, slightly suspicious, it's severe,
Okay.
and then it's like, oh, this is like crazy. You have to look into this. Like four
Okay.
levels, and they assign that those four levels for every category, right? It's for prompt injection, it's for
Right.
cybersecurity, it's for abuse, and so on.
Right.
I think beyond a certain threshold, if anything is flagged, any particular attribute, it goes for a manual
Mm-hmm.
review.
Right.
So if there's a full-fledged team of humans reviewing this
Mm-hmm.
uh, at Azure scale, uh, I think it is a bit difficult to
Right.
mitigate such things. And
Yeah.
somewhere we have to live with that fact, right? And I'll maybe this might become a bit philosophical or political, I don't know, but
Right.
every tech has been like that,
Yeah.
even during its early stages or even when it has matured, right, for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, that is always going to be there. Somehow we
Yeah.
have to uh, keep up with the bad actors the
Right.
best we can. Don't
Right.
really know what the solutions are. You can do prompt engineering, you can
Right.
deploy content moderations, you can filter out certain keywords. Easiest thing to
Right.
do is just filter out certain keywords. That usually
Yeah.
works while
Right.
blocking your competitors or things like that. But
Right.
beyond that, I don't think there's much you can do. I know a bunch of founders in the security space, LLM
Right.
security space. Give them any product, any generative AI product, they'll break it and they'll bring the entire product team to tears by the
Oh,
different ways they're going to break it. So, and they've done it with everything. They've done it with Notion, they've done it with
yeah.
Postman,
Right.
whatever it is, right? So,
Right.
I think it is super difficult.
Right.
And you should not also, as an engineer or an ML
Mm-hmm.
engineer, whatever it is, you should not mislead your product team into believing that you're working on a solution that is going to work. You always have
Right.
to keep them grounded to reality. This is a possibility. You have to inform your legal
Right.
team. You have to inform
Right.
your security team. You have to make sure your TOS of your product are covering that. You have to make sure
Right.
your contracts are covering that and so on.
Right.
So, and then obviously you can do as much as you can on individual level, but
Right.
I don't
Right.
think
No,
it's a solved problem.
absolutely. I think you actually hit a lot of really interesting and valid points there. I think one recent example, um, I'm not very sure of the name of the company, so we are not going to name the company, but I think there was like a very famous product which was creating chatbots, personal chatbots for users, and one such user who was a high school student or something. Yeah,
Yes.
he ended up uh,
Yeah.
the 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 app ended up inciting, suicidal thoughts and everything, and he actually ended up, committing suicide. So I think these are all examples where um, the product in itself could have had like a filter, your point, just add filters to keywords, like, if there are any
Yes.
suicidal keywords related to it, just don't shut down or whatever. And uh, I think a lot of product teams probably will spend a lot of time in making sure, before putting the products into production. Excellent points. I think people will come back to refer to a lot of your points here. I think all of them great takeaways. Um, yeah. Awesome. Very, I think a fruitful conversation around that section there. I think the last section here is just the future of LLMs in production. What you think? What are some of the emerging technologies? It could be hardware, it could be new model architecture, it could be the newest O3, whatever, if you have had a chance to test it, if you're one of the few lucky ones to do that. What do you see the most interesting, and what do you see, probably most impactful in shaping the future of LLMs in production, I guess?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't really checked out O3 yet.
Okay.
But from what I understand is this, and I think this two resources that I think we should really plug in here.
Okay.
One is the situational awareness essays by Ashton Brenner, right? I think those are
Right.
excellent.
Right.
Uh, and the recent keynote at NeurIPS by Ilya, I think that is also really good.
Yes, yes,
Uh,
yeah. I've seen snippets of it. Very interesting. Yep.
yes, I think definitely uh, pre-training was the major factor of scaling model sizes and, in
Yeah.
effect, model capabilities until now. Uh, that definitely has plateaued. And a very good way to track this is, and I found this accidentally, is try to track what the data market is looking like. Uh,
Okay.
and there is inspiration for this from other industries as well, I guess. I don't know. But uh, sometimes if you just start seeing, let's say there's this example, if central banks are buying gold, economy is not
Mhm.
going to be doing that well, right? Uh, I think similar kind of example
You
here
get all
as
your
well.
stocks out.
Yes. And uh, I have an acquaintance who is running a data contracting like contract is like a data contractor. He's doing annotation tasks and so on. Uh, he got subcontracted by a big contractor who was annotating data sets for the next few models and the revals for one of the
Wow.
frontier tech labs.
Okay.
And obviously also hear rumors here and there about what kind of evals they're running internally and what they're doing and so on. And you
Right.
have friend at scale. And I mean, there are resources, right, in the data market.
Right.
And
Right.
uh, the kind of data they are now collecting tells you
Mm.
the age of mass collection of data from the internet is gone.
Right.
That is done, right? So the pre-training scaling phase is really done.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. And that is evident if you look at what these frontier tech labs are investing in terms of data.
Right. Right.
Uh, now, where do you unlock growth? Because I
Right.
think we are far away from growing, right? It's just the pre-training
Right.
paradigm that has growth. Now you have post-training, and post-training
Right.
itself is wonderful, right? Just with a few thousand samples annotated, OpenAI was able to release ChatGPT with RLHF, and that
Right.
tells you how efficient post-training is, even with small
Yeah.
data sizes. So
Hmm.
that's completely up for the grabs, and we are seeing certain flavors of that, right? We are doing COT on the fly, test time in
Right.
like inference time,
Right.
scaling and so on when it comes to post-training bits. I think inference is obviously the next key bit. The more tokens you can
Right.
generate is giving more whiteboard space for the LLM to try things out, interact with the environment, record observations,
Right.
redo the computations, and so on.
Right.
That is definitely, I think, very important. And for that, you need two things. One is obviously better hardware for inference so that it
Right.
can be fast enough, and
Right.
also models which can handle longer output context lengths and support those reasoning kind of
Right.
tasks, which we are seeing in O3 and
Right.
O3 like models.
Right.
Right? Other bit is obviously multimodality. If you think about it,
Hmm.
I like to start with the perceptual uh, attributes of AI, whether it's like
Right.
traditional uh, classifier model. You just look at the feature first. Feature engineering is the most important. If you're doing LLMs, putting the right context in the prompt is most important.
Right.
So that is where most of your gains are going to come.
Right.
And even from an intelligence theory, I think perceptual aspects are the most important bits. Right now, we're just scratching on text. I think
Yeah.
most of intelligence has evolved over audio and vision and so on. And obviously, most of the
Right.
applications, as we discussed, right? We're just in a
Right.
digital world right now. Even that is
Right.
highly multimodal. But real
Right.
world is purely multimodal. There's rarely any
Yeah.
text in real world. It's all images and audio.
Right.
So that definitely. So modality, test, inference, time scaling, I think these are two
Right.
things which are already here, to be very honest. They are not
Right. Right.
very far. So
Right.
those are definitely there. I think architecture-wise, model architectures, optimization methods, and so on, huge scope
Right.
there. We are still building on 2017's attention is all you need paper.
Right.
So huge scope there as well. Hardware-wise, I think it's crazy. Hardware. I recently read this book, the Chip War book. It was
Right.
recommended to me by many, many people. I only recently read it.
Ah. Right.
I think hardware-wise, we are, I mean, we are just too slow. And there's
Okay.
fair bit of, I think there's too many things there. There's like supply chain issues, there's geopolitics.
Right.
The broader macroeconomic factors have to be good
Right.
in order to hardware industry to go on a roll and so on. So
Right.
it's, I mean, it's explainable, it's justified, but I think there's
Right.
still a lot of value to unlock there on the
Absolutely.
hardware side as well.
Right.
So these are some of the emerging directions I see which are going to unlock crazy,
Uh-huh.
crazy amount of values already. Even
Yeah.
they might not sound very impressive from a research or a tech perspective, but in terms of economic values and possibilities they're going to unlock, it's crazy.
Right.
So
Um,
that is something immediately to look forward to, I
mm,
guess.
Absolutely. I think you hit the mark with like a couple of things. One, you mentioned the data annotation, like companies. Like I know there's Scale AI, which is
Yes.
massively growing. I think massively being funded, and it's ARR and everything. You look is crazy. Multimodality, of course, I think that's going to be the key. It's already getting unlocked with all the Sora and Google's new thing, which actually seems to fare better than Sora, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But right, but your final point on the hardware. By the way, no, this is not an investment advice for disclaimer for our audience. Invest on your own peril, but as you mentioned, the hardware space, not just with the Nvidia growth, but with the recent quantum computing, quantum chip companies
Yes.
growth, like Rigetti, and I think there are like three or four that have seen like a massive rise in the last week or a couple of weeks. It's crazy. So yeah, I think you're
Yes.
bang on. But again, not an investment advice, folks. Um,
I mean, hardware goes beyond that as well, right? It's not
right,
just about designing the chips and the
right,
architectures and so on. It's
right.
also about designing the data centers, solving
Mm,
the energy problem.
right,
There's a lot that goes into running hardware,
right,
and it's going to take a lot of innovation across all
right,
dimensions, whether it's like energy,
right,
chip design, or like just plain old silicon. I think it's
right,
too many value unlocks, I think, in place.
right,
So
right.
yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Interesting times to live in.
Yes.
Awesome. I think the final question, in terms of the topics that we're discussing, probably the biggest open research questions and challenges that you think have the biggest potential to get unlocked. You know, uh, yeah. If there's one or two, what would you think? Like the biggest research questions? Um,
So I think there is I like to think about this in, and since you're specifically focusing on LLMs in production,
Hmm.
I like to think about this from the lens of software on 1.0 and software 2.0. Uh, and just to maybe if somebody who doesn't know what that is, I think Karpati came up with the term software 2.0 way
Right,
early, I think back in 2014 or 15, where
right,
it's not a deterministic formal program, but a predictive probabilistic program, which might
right,
behave differently upon every execution. I
right,
think what has happened is since 2021 or 2020, let's say, since GPT-3 came out, which was software 2.0, huge
right,
leap in that. Uh, it was a software 1.0 community which was trying to integrate software 2.0 into its products, into its
right.
workflows to make themselves better. For example, search. Perplexity just Google was PageRank, which was deterministic, and
Yeah,
now you have
yeah,
LLMs in it, and it's better. Similarly, for coding, you had
right,
IntelliCode, IntelliSense, which is to work on LSPs and all those things, and used to give deterministic predictions. Now you
right.
have Copilot, right?
Yeah,
So there was a huge pool from software 1.0 to integrate this software 2.0 bit, which was the AI bit. And
right,
that was very that wave, I think, survived till or was like dominating till 2022. And
right,
then soon we realized, oh, we are going to hit a ceiling very soon.
right,
Now we have to think about it's essentially both of them have to come to a common ground, work together well in order to make successful products, right? Then
right,
we realized, oh, these are great, but they are not still very good at reliably or predictably interacting with the digital world. So maybe
right.
it's not just a software 1.0 community that is to pull software 2.0 towards it. It's also software 2.0 community that is to pull software 1.0 towards it.
Before letting you go, I asked this question to all the guests. What is your favorite product? It could be anything. But yeah, what is your favorite product and why?
Um, oh, okay. You mean a tech product or
Anything.
it
Any,
can
no, it could be tech, it could be just I know your pen or whatever, like anything.
I just say my MacBook. I don't know why.
Ah,
Uh, uh,
interesting.
I mean, uh, it is obviously it has to be with an active internet connection. Without that, it's pretty
Right,
much
right,
useless for me.
right,
Uh, but this is like I own a very small MacBook Air, the base model. It's M2, I think. Uh,
right,
but it really enables me so much, and it's so convenient to carry around.
right.
I don't know how they do it. I have like 10 different Docker containers running, 10 different services running, and this Postman running, and this VS Code and
right,
Cursor running. These are very heavy applications, and
right,
it never disappoints. And it's
right,
still super thin, super portable. I don't know. I still think it's one of my best investments. I do
right.
carry it everywhere, and yeah, I think if all products, I think I'll say that's the one.
Okay.
Uh, if it's just like software or something digital,
Yeah.
uh, I think it has to be two things. I would say
Hmm.
one is the entire Google suite. I think
Okay.
uh, it is amazing. It's so minimalistic. I still take all my notes in Google
Right,
Docs, no Notion,
right,
nothing. I still use
right,
just Google Calendar for my appointments, no Calendly,
right,
nothing.
right,
I still use my email for everything, Drive for storage, and it's just amazing. And then
right.
for AI, I think it's Cursor right now. Cursor is just
Uh,
amazing. It's just enabled me
uh,
so much. So I think
it's
these would be the
interesting.
two.
You work on a competitor product.
I mean, you have to do it, right? Because you
Yeah,
always
yeah,
have to, as I said, the code assistant
right.
paradigm, there's a playbook now, and you have to keep
Yeah,
tracking what feature is coming out and so on.
yeah.
So I have everything installed. I have Codium, I have VS Code, I have Cursor. All of them are
Right,
installed on my laptop. So
right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, Rajaswa, thank you so much. This was amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
if you
this
have
is quite
some,
fun.
yeah.
Yes,
uh,
and I again, I really maybe now you understand, but the day you reached out, I went to the Product Bulb website and I immediately linked. Like I knew I could relate a lot. I
uh,
went through a couple of blogs. I went to the PM
right,
spider
right.
chart kind of a thing as well. And I was like, oh my
Interesting.
God,
Okay.
yes, more people need to think like this so that we have actual usable, AI products out
Right,
there.
right.
And I knew I'm going to have
Yeah.
fun. So
Uh,
just by looking at that content, and actually I
uh,
had fun. So thank you for that.
Thank Thank you so much. I think the takeaways from this 2 hours, or like two more than 2 hours, I think it's going to be great. So yeah, thank you so
Yes.
much. Um,
Yeah. You're welcome.